Okay, got it. Everybody get it? Or is it just me? Okay. We're obviously are having all sorts of difficulties, some technical ones and some illness ones as well. So what I was saying was that normally I think I would give somewhat longer introductions, but given the fact that with all of these technical and illness things, we really we're starting a little late, so we have a little less time than I had wanted. These webinars are sort of scheduled to be about an hour and a half long. We have sometimes gone on a little bit beyond that, but we will try to stick to this. Following Clara's practice of going from east to west, and it has to do with time zones, people in what is Paul? What time is it? 11? Yeah, it's very late. So that's partly why we always do this. I will follow that practice as well. But you know, if you feel that you need to actually say something about yourself during the initial 5 minutes, it's fine. A reminder, several reminders. One is please, to the speakers, please remember that you have 2 rounds. So in the first round, a maximum of 5 minutes, and then I will keep track, and then we will open for a second round, maximum 5 minutes. If it's less, that's even better, so we can have ample time for questions, answers, discussions, debate, and so forth. A second thing is it would be really helpful if the questions and comments actually came through chat rather than other things, and that's very helpful. I guess, let me sort of go ahead again from right to left. So we will do Paul, let's see, Nikiwa. Am I mispronouncing any names? Rui, and Andrea and Alex, in that order, okay? So let me just do very quick introductions now, and we can proceed. Paul Hansen is at Hokkaido University in Japan. He is primarily conducting field work in Japan, but has also done research in Jamaica and Canada. He has 1 book under review on the industrialization of Hokkaido dairy farms, and another contracted on well-being, One Health and Rural Japan. Anu, what's your last name? Jalai? Anu, am I mispronouncing your name? Are you here? She's not here. Okay. If she's not here, then we will proceed. Okay. Now people are sort of joining in. In any case, I hope Anu will join us. National University of Singapore, an environmental anthropologist working at the National University of Singapore South Asian Studies and Comparative Asian Studies departments. We still hope she will join us. Okay, so the long frame, but I'm going to do shorter introductions. Next is Nikiwa Solomon of UCT, University of Cape Town in South Africa. She tends to work at the interface of science, technology, politics, and urban river and water management. Clearly she is also a research associate at the African Center for Green Economy, where she practices the integration of theoretical knowledge and the experience of the everyday, engaging with community-based organizations and civil society. Rui,
yes.
Yeah, thank you. Of the University of Lisbon in Portugal, who probably knows Clara well, is an invited assistant professor, has worked on human evolution at the University of Coimbra, has a master's degree in human evolution and biology, also from the University of Coimbra, and a PhD in anthropology, specializing in biological anthropology and ethnoecology at the Universidade Nova de Lisboa, the new University of Lisbon, and Cardiff University. She can explain lots of research interests having to do with political ecology and anthropology, natural research. Next will be Andrea. Jody, is that even close?
Zuri.
Zuri, okay, sorry. I speak Portuguese more than Portuguese, but Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais in Brazil. She is in the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil, where she founded the group on environmental studies and coordinated the team that created the undergraduate course in socio-environmental sciences. You can see that a lot of this is very important work. She has published articles and books about mining, large dams, environmental conflicts.
Sobre a minha área, não sei como é que ele foi convidado.
Sorry,
não
wait.
tem uma única publicação
I should have said, please mute everybody except for the speaker. Always mute. I heard Portuguese, so I don't know whether that was Andrea or did I say procedure? Rui. Anyway, last but not least, Alex Oler. Again, am I mispronouncing? Is that correct? Yes. From the University of Regina in Canada, Canadian. He is a circumpolar ethnographer with special interests in human-animal and human-landscape relations. Has worked a lot on how societal ideas in religious, philosophical, and practical contexts converge with the ways in which people relate to animals within and outside of their homelands. Anyway, I could obviously go on much more, but let's not take much longer to start, because again, we were late and we're really all quite delighted that you are here. So some people will join us, but a reminder, if you're not speaking, I will try to model this. If you're not speaking, just mute. So I'm going to unmute very soon so that Paul can speak, and 5 minutes max in the opening round. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Paul, you need to unmute now.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, I wanted to start by thanking Clara for inviting me, but I just hope she's well. And I'd like to thank you, Virginia, for moderating. But I have to say, when I was first asked to join this group, I was a bit puzzled. Without getting into Latour's politics of nature, it's some provocation being what this worldly thing can be called unnatural. At first glance, my research seems to be a perfect counterpoint to any notion of, quote, anthropology in the natural world. I am an anthropologist, that's true enough, but I've focused on industrial dairy farming in Hokkaido and companion canines in Osaka, relations with two of the most human-altered species in utterly human-altered locations. So I began to wonder if the invitation to this talk was kind of a setup. At a AAA, I was once the very uncomfortable outlier in a round table of critical animal studies scholars in saying that A, industrial farmers are really not all that bad, and B, activist anthropology is basically for activists. You're going to do very little to make an impact on farmers, fishers, foresters, dog breeders, all the people that you rail against, nor are you likely going to sway the general public talking amongst yourself in esoteric language. So alarm bells were ringing when I was invited. However, then I thought about this more. Hokkaido, where I live, work, and research, is Japan's lasting contribution to the colonial settler state model. The island was once called Ezodashima, or Wild or Barbarian Island, and it was renamed Hokkaido, or North Sea Route, in 1869 and officially claimed by Japan. But from the 1600s, culminating in the late 1800s and early 1900s, its indigenous inhabitants, human and non-human, were subdued, for example, the Ainu people, or eradicated, like the Ezo wolf, to make way for extractive industries and agricultural settlements of Japanese migrants who were often marginalized people themselves. And I think this is a common global and more than human story, though one seldom focused on in the context of Japan. Today, for industrial farms to exist, the unceded waterways and lands of indigenous people are used, bought, sold, paved over, fenced, and wildlife must be kept at bay through, for example, another research area I've focused on, municipal or privately paid hunters. They hunt a variety of species that are considered harmful to industrial farming, but perhaps most notably in Hokkaido are deer, who ravage crops and some farmers worry have the potential to spread viruses to domesticated, or we could say denatured animals. This is often framed in Hokkaido as the Shika no Mondai, or the deer problem, but not to pick on Hokkaido. In more southern regions of Japan, you have the monkey problem or the wild boar problem. It's the same problem. Via a host of unforeseen happenstances, I wound up doing research on companion dogs in Osaka, but my original proposal for that research, and it's a long story, was actually urban pests and not urban pets. And I still maintain for some young anthropologists out there, this would be a great topic to pick up on. Foxes, crows, cockroaches, raccoons, and even bear are increasingly common in the suburbs. And they blur this boundary between, quote, domestic and natural. One key reason for the encroachment of these species is human depopulation. In other words, Japan dehumanizing, and a reversion of domesticated land, whether farmland, satoyama, or villages on the outskirts of human population centers that revert, or we could say, go back to nature. And finally, beyond this worldly connections, urban Japan has historically had a special place for nature, culture, boundary crossing animals. Spiritual beings such as inari, which are divine foxes that carry messages, or tanuki, which are raccoons anthropomorphized as well-endowed drunken rabble-rousers. So I feel that this topic today is an important crossroads of post-human and cosmopolitical concerns, of ethics and ecology, and focusing on my own sort of contemporary research right now, ikigai, or meaning of life, and One Health. And I hope I can contribute something to this discussion, though I'm not sure what yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm sure you can contribute quite a bit. Is Anu here? No? Well, if she actually, can somebody send her email? I can put her in at any point. She is supposedly in Singapore, and it is late at night, but let us proceed with Nikiwe then. Nikiwe Solomon, whom I introduced before, who appears way on the left on my screen. Anyway, go ahead, Nikiwe.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you for the invitation to be a part of this discussion. And I'm wishing Clara a speedy recovery. So I was asked to join this talk and had no idea what I would talk about because it was quite open-ended, the natural world. What does that mean? And as an anthropologist and working at the intersection between infrastructure, the human world and the natural world, like where do you even start? What conversations can you even have? But because I recently finished my PhD looking at urban river management and focusing on a particular river in Cape Town, I thought I would perhaps start off on that part, looking at the kind of research questions that were emerging, the kind of topics and kind of issues that were emerging from that. And also thinking deeply about the next phase of my research, which aims to look at critical zones inquiries, looking at the critical zone. What is a critical zone? And what the earth sciences are looking at in terms of critical zone studies and how we bring the anthropological or ethnographic aspect into understanding the human nature relationships. So I'll give a brief overview of my research that I did during my PhD, and then also to start to throw in some seeds on the critical zone research. So my thesis explored how diverse ways of knowing and being with the Kells River, which is located in Cape Town, South Africa, is shaped and in turn shapes the river. So management in this context of Cape Town and in South Africa, management of water in pipes and rivers, and the development of water infrastructure are deeply rooted in the societal development agendas that over time have been embedded in discourses of empire, economic growth, state formation, sustainability, and technological efficiency. So when river management is informed by different agendas, the practice of management then differs across different levels of governance, research communities, and multiple meanings of different forms of human-water relationships emerge. So my PhD study examines how the resulting tangle of meanings impacts river management practices in Cape Town, and in turn how this shapes the well-being of people and more than human communities living in and with the river. So the specific questions that are asked in my research are, what are the diverse ways of knowing and relating to this particular river, the Kells River? And how are these diverse ways of knowing and relating enacted? drawing from Anne-Marie Moll's notion of the body multiple. So how does this shape river and capital flows? How does it shape governance and the well-being of multi-species communities? So it drew on ethnographic fieldwork for 3 years, archival research and doing some water testing in the Kills River catchment area. And I was exploring how politics, technology, and the environment are impacted by river management practices in Cape Town, and how these produce different versions of the river, which in turn shape the everyday of the Kills and how it is managed. So that was essentially my PhD research. But where I'm going now is to look at the critical zones work, which essentially is the study of material flows between the bedrock, so underneath, so from your aquifers all the way up into the air, and how materials flow through that space. But the challenge with looking at critical zones research is often that it excludes the human. It happens with, the focus is on just, the natural aspect. So the next phase of my research is to look at how the human is a part of that, how politics, how technology, human technologies, how, how regulations affect, the flows of materials within these spaces. And that's what I want to be doing for the next couple of years.
Thank you, Nikki. Well, you guys are great at sticking to the time slot. Okay, thank you very much. I still know Anu, all right. Rui Sa from the University of Lisbon.
Yes, so greetings everyone. I hope Clara will recover soon. And thank you for the invitation and all the organizers for setting this up. So I'd like to start by sharing a quick picture with you, if it is possible. Okay. Are you seeing it? Okay, perfect. So this photograph that you are actually seeing could be metaphorically considered a wounded landscape. And why wounded? So notice that is in this riverine gallery. The first line, what you see, it's acacias. And then on the second line on behind this landscape, you'll see eucalyptus as the most representative trees here. So this landscape that belongs to the Natura network classification system recognized by the European Union in the north center of Portugal, in the downriver area, the landscape was completely transformed after the terrible fires of 2017 that devastated Portugal, where the country was forced to ask for international help to fight the fire, and where almost 100 people lost their lives. So instead of poplars, birches, oaks, and chestnut trees, all the trees you can see in this riverside gallery belong to invasive species. So invasive species show certain behaviors that characterize them as very fast growing and adaptive dispersal, eliminating native species. And therefore, they threat the local biodiversity. So this behavior derives from these plants themselves, or it is simply an extension of our human invasive behavior? So it's this type of question that I'm currently interested. And I depart from the idea that is present in the Feral Atlas of Annette Zing that consider invasiveness as one of the main detonators of the age we are living in, the Anthropocene. So let me go back when this project started. So during my first confinement in Lisbon, I was feeling what can perhaps be described as a nature deficit disorder. I was feeling disconnected, I was feeling sad, I was feeling anxious. And all I could think was that those in the rural world will be much better coping and dealing with the confinement than me stuck in my flat in Lisbon. So I began to wonder how those people who have experienced another natural fire tragedies a few years ago were living that, this currently moment. I start making contacts between classes and endless hours spent in Zoom. I had the idea to start conversations with people from that region that I know very well, because I also belong to the region. So I start to make informal interviews and talking with them, because I have this romantic vision that they are at least in contact with nature. And the answers I got, it was really different from what I was expecting. They were saying to me, well, look, this is even sad, more sad here, because we feel the plague in the air, the COVID, but we also feel it in the trees, eucalyptus. We are surrounded by eucalyptus. These are no forests no longer. What we only see is eucalyptus. So this is not nature, it's something different. And that kind of answers was really strong and striking. Let me just quote one passage, and then I stopped, and I have other things here that I want to share. This student I interviewed tells me this. The trend that invasive species will become more and more problematic in the future. For example, last year, they were already less problematic than this year. And as time goes on, they grow. It's urgent that we deal with this issue, because if we don't look at the region, we may have in 2 or 5 or 6 years, this will all burn down again. And then I don't know how it's going to be, honestly. I think we are on our own. The forest has been abandoned, and so have we. So this feeling of something cruel happened on this landscape has a name. It's called solastalgia. And this type of feelings is what it currently interests me, how the landscape can be injured, and now this type of natural injuries are hurting mentally people. So I'll stay for here now, and then we can discuss.
You will have another chance and questions.
Yes.
Can somebody? Oh, there. Great. Thank you. So, okay, Andrea, you're next. Zuri. I'm getting better.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? No?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so I would like to thank the organizers, and especially Clara Saraiva for setting this up, and I hope she gets better soon. I also had some difficulties in trying to elaborate a few ideas to speak in 4 minutes, especially that I believe that anthropology in the so-called natural world is a rather complex issue, but I understand the idea is to provoke a debate, and my role here is to bring a perspective from my positioning within this academic and political field in Brazil. For a long time, we have been discussing the environmental crisis, which appears to be a crisis of civilization, given the already perceptible and increasingly intense and interrelated effects of climate change. Globally, inequalities are increasing because there is no longer sufficient space left to expand the extractive frontier, and there are no cheap alternatives to fossil fuels. We are close to breaking the biophysical limits that make life possible, because resources have been grabbed by a minority of the globe. The close link between the concentration of resources such as land and water, the new realities forced by climate change, and increasing inequalities in the world cannot be ignored. So I would like to argue that the ecological question is a political issue and must be understood and dealt with as such. This is nothing new, especially for those who are being researching from the political ecology perspective since the 20th century. But the power dimensions of social and environmental relations has become more evident today in the face of the growing crisis and the ways in which the environment is disputed in society. The Amazon rainforest has been devastated at an accelerating rate every day. And in the last 4 years, with the support of anti-environmental and anti-indigenous policies in Brazil as government policies, the deregulation of environmental protection promotes the destruction of the ecologically sustainable livelihoods of indigenous peasants and farming communities in Brazil and other countries in Latin America. These groups have always had a coevolution link with the natural world. Thus, as their conditions of existence has been undermined, the codes of nature conservation that are part of a mutual relationship with the natural environment have also been weakened in a way that we must speak today of processes of ecocide and ethnocide. The peoples of the South, who depend on natural resources as their source of life and livelihoods, face the destruction, diversion, and appropriation of their ecosystems. This generates social environmental inequalities that are generally imposed on impoverished rural groups and slum dwellers in large cities. Indeed, the intersectionality of class, gender, race, and ethnicity must be highlighted in anthropological works about human relations to the so-called natural world. We are at a time of great change in perceptions and sensitivities around the environmental issue. The sources of social trust that in the past made it acceptable to sacrifice the web of life for the promise of undefined progress have been shattered. It is no longer possible to trust that technology can solve these civilizational challenges and that environmental costs can be postponed until tomorrow on the assumption that science can always push the frontier of expansion in resource extraction a little farther. Different social and environmental groups, movements, and communities in Latin America, and especially in Brazil, have been confronting the generalized destruction of the natural world in several and innovative ways. Anthropology and other social sciences have still to deal with the social and political constructions, images, narratives, and also ontologies that are woven into the mobilizations in defense of the environment. There is a call for an epistemic turn demanding from us a deconstruction of thought, in this case of hegemonic, Western, capitalist, patriarchal thought, which is a task that obliges us to assume a radical position and also a public stand in such matters, in the sense, this radical position in the sense of diving to the bottom of the questions that trouble our present for an effective engagement with reality, in the hope that in this way, we will be able to open paths to ideas that postpone the end of the world, as the indigenous writer Ailton Krenak invites us to do. I shall stop here with these first ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex? Still no news. So Alex, I think it's...
Yeah, thank you. This is it's a fascinating group of people. So many variously different perspectives. I really appreciated Paul starting out with some reservations as to how this is all going to fit together. But I now that I'm the last one in this round, I can see how things are starting to fit together. I think I'll build on Andrea's comment and summary of the kind of work that she's involved in. Anthropocene is a key term that's come up several times in different people's contributions already. And just this overall dismay at where the world is at in terms of our broken relationship with the environment. I think these are themes that resonate throughout the contributions so far, and I think we will come back to that. Unlike most of the presenters so far, who take quite a, let's say, eco-political stance, from political ecology, etc., my research is less concerned with the politics of our relationship to whatever we want to use, the term nature perhaps, or the environment. And I'm coming more from a linguistic standpoint, or maybe a post-linguistic standpoint. What I'm really interested in are the same questions, however, and that is not how can we stop, stall, or reverse our current predicament as human society on this planet, but what is there for us to rediscover in what we as a race, as the human race, as a species, may already have known for millennia, going back into deep time, if you wish, about our communication with other than humans. So, whether you look at this from a technological standpoint or from a political, ecological standpoint, what I hear in Andrea's contribution is that our ontological perception of what it means to relate and what it means to be alive as part of the world, something's gone awry, something's broken, something in the communication has gone down. Like a Zoom call that is suffering from interference, or somebody doesn't know how to turn on their mic, or the video doesn't work. We seem to have that kind of trouble with the world that we live in. And like Andrea said, I think very correctly, technology has not offered any satisfying solutions in rectifying this disconnect. So the study that I just started, actually, it's a new 5-year project with my collaborator, Sarah Abbott here at the University of Regina, is concerned with rediscovering interspecies communication. And when I say interspecies communication, we're really interested in plant-human communication, as well as in animal-human communication. And what the focal point of this research is going to be is somatic communication. So we're really interested in how the body is used, how living beings, whether they are plants or various animals, whether they fly or swim or dive or walk or whatever it is, or slither, how different species are able to develop and pass on a knowledge, a kind of reading knowledge of other bodies in the landscape. So what can we learn from various societies about their ethnoethology, or their ethnoethology, or ethnology, as ethology, as we say. So the kind of knowledges that have existed over generations, the kind of teachings that have been passed on to the next generation about how to properly interpret the meaning of movement in the landscape, how plants spread, but also how animals group together, and how different, say for instance, circadian rhythms across species can be orchestrated to work together in multi-species households, as an example. And so with Paul here, I take a pretty critical perspective on this wild-tame dichotomy. In fact, I've written a book about that, Beyond Wild and Tame, where through my South Siberian fieldwork, I try to question this rather clear-cut dichotomy that is rooted in Western ontologies about the environment, that certain species have been denatured, a term that Paul used and equates with domestication. And to be a little bit provocative, I might question that and would be happy to discuss that further on. What does it mean to have a species that's domestic, especially if you look at societies that don't even use words in their language to describe what is domestication, but who use a very different approach. So for instance, who look at animals in relation to their habitat. So who speak of animals of the forest, or animals of the water bodies, or animals of the air, or of the house, of the home, or near the home, or things like that. But where there are no clear-cut lines between this is a denatured animal and this is a wild animal in its natural habitat. So I guess what I'm trying to do is A, problematize what is naturalness and what is perturbation. Both terms used in the natural sciences quite freely. Yes. So that gives you an idea of the angle that I'll be contributing to our discussion here. Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you very much. Yeah, don't worry. I know that Michelle has emailed Anu just in case there may be a time zone problem, but she's still not here. So let's proceed to sort of the second round. Generally, what we do in these webinars in the second round is still pretty much stick to the speakers. And Clara has always gone again from east to west. So we'll follow the same process here. But what each speaker contributes may depend. It could be something you have prepared that you want to add. It could be responding to some other things here. So you could be more or less provocative. You can use this time about the same. And you have all really been very good about time. So Paul, we'll start with you again.
Right. Well, I didn't have anything prepared because I had no idea where this was going. But the one thing I would say, I guess, harkening back to what I was talking about at the start, would be, and I guess this is directed towards Andrea, but I want to be clear that it's not a negative comment, right? I mean, I think it was probably pretty obvious from what I first said that there's a kind of danger, I think, in, I guess what I'm saying is when I think of my own work, I try to make my work as depolitical as possible, as de-activist as possible. And the reason for that is because I think the data itself, so someone would have a very hard time, in other words, reading anything that I've written ethnographically about industrial dairy farming to think that I am in favor of industrial dairy farming. But I don't come out with an activist sort of standpoint. It's just, it's there in the data, right? Once you have manure lagoons, once you have de-skilled workers, once you have these abused animals, you don't really need to take this activist standpoint. And I would say that there's a kind of danger in doing that. On the second point that I'd like to bring up kind of runs through all the papers, and it's this idea of the Anthropocene. And I want to kind of, and maybe it's tied in a little bit to the last comment, which is this idea of what is this dichotomy between nature and denatured, right? Or between domestication and natural. And I would say that when you think about something like industrial farming, or you think about something like, companion animal keeping practices, you're looking at a pretty extreme version there of domestication. And I think that does stand out aside from what we think about nature or living in a more natural kind of environment. But this idea of, Rui's idea of invasive species really got me thinking about the Anthropocene in general, right? And there is this sort of image that tends to come up that nature is in some way this kind of non-changing thing, this sort of self-governing system, but actually everything is an invasive species. I mean, any human being outside of Africa is an invasive species. So I always kind of wonder about these changes in the environment, or these taking over of invasive species in a new space. Is this not just evolution? This is just a process that's been going on for the entirety of the history of the Earth. Right? So I guess that's all. And the other thing I'd say is a lot of something that I'm focused on that maybe not a lot of people in anthropology have focused on is One Health. And sort of my focus, what I'm looking at right now, is moving towards this direction of One Health, which is basically looking at humans, non-humans, and ecology as a kind of system. It's coming out of veterinary studies, but I mean, I've been looking at that in the sort of idea. It's a Japanese concept of ikigai, which Gordon Matthews, if he's here, knows very well. But the history of ikigai has tended to focus on human social relationships. And I've been trying to look at how that could be extended to, for for example, relationships with non-human others, but also relationships, affective relationships with an environment. What draws people to live in a certain environment that otherwise people think is lacking in some way. So yeah, I think I'd leave it there for now and see where other people take this.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Okay, Nikiwa, given Anu's continued absence, you're next. Right?
Yes. So I think Andrea would be able to respond or, speak to what Paul has said. But I just wanted to speak to the aspect of activism and the kind of work that's being done, well, in my own personal experience and the research that I've done. So when I started my research, my interest was in these relationships between the river and, politics, technology, and people that were living along the river. But when you start to see these pockets of injustice, and I, as an academic that is paid by public funds, there's always this imperative to be able to, this ability to respond to the kind of injustices that are being acted out on the ground. And for me, within the context of the Anthropocene, within the context of, the kind of politics around race, around gender issues, it's imperative that the work that I do on a personal level actually benefits the people that are paying me through their taxes to do the work. So yeah, that's just some of the thought that I had. And in terms of, looking at the Anthropocene and some of the types of logics in terms of how, governance happens or how, management practices happen in that space, in the case of Brazil, how farming happens or wherever you are. These have geological effects, right? We are leaving an imprint on the land as human beings, and these are geological effects that are going to be experienced by future generations. And it can't help but be political. It is political because people are inheriting these damaged landscapes. And how do we respond as anthropologists in this moment, in this time, to these kinds of stresses? Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. Andrea, you're not quite next, but you have noticed that a lot of the speakers have responded to. So Rui, I think you're next, right?
Yes. So, well, more than intervention, I have several questions here that I would like to share with you. Paul, your idea of invasive species being an act of evolution, it's interesting. I was thinking about that as well. But then I was wondering, so what about then the concept of biodiversity itself? So the forests, the gardens, if they are being dominated by these species, where do we really put biodiversity there? So that is an interesting thing that we need to deal, although because invasive species has a lot of economic influence as well. Alex mentioned here something, he said that something in the communication is going down. And I agree with this, because currently we are being bombed by these buzzwords, like this idea, for example, from the IPCC, climate resilient development. What exactly is a climate resilient development? Or nature-based solutions, I love this one, because everything when we apply for funding, they ask, okay, what are the nature-based solutions? And for example, rewilding. Rewilding is the perfect idea of nature-based solution. But for example, in this case, in the center-north part of Portugal, rewilding that area after the wildfires, what will happen is that the landscape will be completely transformed from even the perception, the memory of the people, and they are creating other injuries. So yes, I think there is a communication problem here. These enmeshments in these ideas of nature-based solutions, climate resilient developments. I have doubts about this, and perhaps together we need to think what these exactly mean and how do we interpret them, because probably each one of us are interpreting them in a different way. I also agree with Alex, this binarism of natural versus perturbation. Although there are some theoretical movements, eco-queer, for example, that says that there is a continuum, and if we continue to use these categories, we are creating fake discontinuities. So this is also an interesting point of view. But in a more pragmatic way, perhaps I would like to ask you, and because me here in Portugal, several colleagues of mine, they are making real efforts for the anthropologists to have a voice, especially in the environmental impact assessment processes. So I would like to ask you, how is in your countries, you as anthropologists, as in a collective, do you intervene in these environmental impact assessments or not? Because I think it's something that it's useful for us to share and learn with each other. I'll stay here.
Okay, thank you, Rui. Andrea.
Yeah. Hello. I said the idea was to provoke.
You're provoking, yes.
Help to provoke the debate, but I wasn't expecting that much. Anyway, as I said in the beginning, my contribution to the debate comes from my positioning in the field of anthropology in Brazil, coming from Brazil and Latin America. So as Donna Haraway long taught us, that the production of knowledge doesn't come from nowhere. We are immersed in society, in historical and political networks. So our knowledge, the production of knowledge it's not possible, Paul, to be depoliticized. I don't really like these labels at all. I prefer to say that we have a position in society as we have in the field of anthropology. And anthropology have a stand in history since the beginning, since colonialism and imperialism. So yeah, we have to have a stand in public issues. And I believe your position is also a political position. You chose to have this position. And I believe that you can do so because you don't come from the South. You come from a northern country, you work in Japan, you work within a scene which allows you to be absent, to be distant from violence, sheer violence. Right now, 2 people are missing in the Amazon, an anthropologist and a British journalist. They are missing since Sunday. This is for real. This is where I live. This is where I stand. This is the environment struggle here in Brazil. So I speak about a very strong context of violence and injustice, and more than injustice, people are dying, people are being killed. There's a human right issue here, if you like, if you want to use this label, human right. So anthropologists cannot be mute about it. So we have a lot to say about it, because also anthropologists, they have been working for the powerful people, entrepreneurs, and also, you know, working and being persecuted by their opponents. So we are in the middle of a war here, a resource war, a territorial war here in Brazil. So it's a huge context. And I'd like to provoke Alex to perhaps move a little bit in speaking about the Anthropocene, perhaps moving a little bit from biology or the natural sciences, from the category of species towards history and the idea of social formations and historical processes so we can really speak about the Anthropocene in a different manner, as already mentioned by Nikiwi from South Africa, which I really appreciate your positions, Nikki. So we are standing in the South position here. Perhaps it's a clash here, I don't know. Anyway, this is a false dichotomy. I don't want to go through this, but let me say a few words here. As I said before in my first intervention, there is a claim for epistemic turn. There are some movements going on. And the idea is for us here, is to question some notions that is very dear to the hegemonic thought. The ideas, for example, of development and progress. We need to deconstruct these ideas, to confront these ideas of development and progress. Indigenous knowledges invite us to look at mining, for example, with a different eye, as an activity that does not extract food from the earth, but releases disease, evil, death, as noted by shaman Davi Kopenawa. By mixing this indigenous understanding, knowledge, with an anthropological approach, we can say that new extractivism, as well as hydroelectric dams and other large projects in the name of development, they are centered on a commodity economy that involve immense financial investments at a transnational level and demand a lot of land and water to produce abstract wealth for a few people in the world. These enterprises, therefore, require large territories. And this is a core and conflictive issue, the demand for territory and the type of territoriality that mining and other large projects represent. They clash directly with the multiple territorialities of the different social groups that in fact comprise the Brazilian nation state. This process, which David Harvey calls accumulation by dispossession, has some central elements that I have been calling violence of affects, violência das afetações, because it refers to something that goes beyond expropriation, beyond material violence. There are processes that give rise to a set of other associated forms of violence, which are symbolic, epistemic, social, physical, psychological, emotional, cultural violence. It is necessary then to analyze this process in their complexity and multi-scale dimensions in order to understand in a radical way that they can only be accomplished through the elimination of the ways of life of other social groups which have a territorialized existence. These are processes that unleash ecocide and ethnocide, a violence which is proper to them. Therefore, violence is not an unintended consequence of these projects, which could, in theory, if well managed, not be violent. Violence is an intrinsic and constitutive part of these colonizing projects. By depriving the other of land, water, soil, a garden, a house, the other is also deprived of memory, knowledge, the possibility of reproduction as a social subject and as a group. We're talking about various types of death. In the process of installation or operation of these large projects, different strategies are activated, even that of letting die, by successive impediments and imposed needs, such as difficulties in access to water, which is always common in these cases. Okay. There are strategies to make life inviable. I'm finishing places which anthropology has identified as forms of displacement in situ. So if the critical and epistemic exercise that seeks to deconstruct the buildings of dominant thought opens up breaches to foresee cracks and exits for the future, ongoing experiments in Latin America also signal directions for change. There are varied forms of resistance and creative ways of organizing and thinking the paths of tomorrow. Some dimension of these, I will conclude, are four dimensions. First, these experiments, they trigger new repertoires that interweave the social and the environment in the denunciation of environmental inequality. There are struggles that inscribe territory in environmental conflicts. that resist enclosures and defend the spaces of freedom represented by the commons. They also question the hegemonic form of scientific knowledge. They combine traditional and scientific knowledge, as indigenous and quilombola writings themselves show us. In this specific sphere of political organization, many political movements challenge the hegemonic forms of doing politics and the forms of state governance. And last but not least, another dimension of these struggles and forms of knowledge production points to a Latin American feminist political ecology under construction. So I believe that anthropology has much to gain from engaging with these issues, because after all, culture sits in places, as Arturo Escobar long noted. Anthropology has to gain by engaging with initiatives and in different scales, analysis of power relations in different scales, as Eric Wolf has long also provoked us to do. Okay. Sorry about it, my time limit here. I had to respond to the provocation.
I understand. Okay. Alex, you're next.
Yeah, thank you so much. Fascinating perspectives there, all of them very, very important. I really appreciate Andrea's challenge for us as anthropologists, especially those who are in the North, to remain fully aware of the war that we're actually waging globally. So I couldn't agree more with you, Andrea. I think this is accurate also of the North, not just of the global South. And there are different ways of responding to that and different ways of engaging with that very real challenge. I think political anthropology, obviously, and approaches such as those of your own are very well suited to respond to that. And I can only applaud the way in which you take up that responsibility through activism and engage it as an anthropologist. And I think Nikiwe is doing pretty much the same in South Africa. So this is, you're great examples to certainly anthropologists like myself who are situated in the North. Personally, and here maybe I would take sides a little bit with Paul, for those of us who may not be immediately affected by our neighbors being kidnapped on the Amazon or things like that, although many of us are still affected by great injustices, such as the onslaught of the Russian Federation onto Ukraine right now, for many of us who have done fieldwork in those areas. So I would say many of us in the global North too are almost directly aware of and affected by these kinds of absolute violent explosions. But I want to take it back to this word of violence that Andrea has introduced into this discussion. And I also agree with violence, and silencing specifically. I think what we are facing, the aftermaths and the ongoing violence of colonialism, both in the global North and the global South, they are rooted in silencing. And to me, that again speaks to this breakdown in communication that I was referring to earlier. And this is something that goes beyond the human species, obviously. So while I applaud those who point out the direness of the situation in which we find ourselves as the human race, I also, as an anthropologist, believe that we are uniquely positioned to contribute building blocks towards a future and a future path forward together. And of course, this future path forward together has to look at what has silencing caused. In what ways are we still silencing? We can say, okay, we want to tackle this injustice that is causing the Anthropocene, but that in itself solve it. And I'm not saying we have the tools to solve it right away, but where do we even start to build these tools? And what can anthropology contribute towards the building of these tools? And I think one of the things that perhaps we do quite well in our discipline is to listen carefully, and to make room for non-conventional or marginalized, suppressed or repressed voices. And I think that's what you are doing in Brazil, in South Africa, and that's what we are trying to do here in the global North as well. So what does it mean to learn anew to listen? And that takes us back to this response ability, the ability to respond, not for us to respond. The ones that are in power as humans, we've been responding all the time. I shouldn't say respond. We've been imposing our own voices. We've been extracting, but not extracting, not exchanging. And so what does it mean to regain the ability to listen, to observe, especially those who either don't speak a language because they are a plant or they are a bedrock? For instance, I work with indigenous people in southern Siberia who are very much involved with mining, but who too believe that rock respawns and has a response ability, an ability to respond. So when you talk about mining, when you talk about natural resource extraction, it is a conversation. It is an ancient conversation that ancestors have had and that must be kept in balance today. So there is a kind of vocabulary, there is a kind of language that we have to relearn. How do we actually engage with that rock? How can we make sure that we don't violate the other, in this case, rocks? How do we learn to listen to rocks and respond to rocks in equitable ways? This, of course, will revolutionize the mining industry. And we have a lot of that based here in Canada, diamond mines, all kinds of mines in the global north. And these are all examples of silencing the natural world. There is no discourse, there is no true exchange, no back and forth, no listening, no responding to the needs of non-humans. So my question and my challenge as an anthropologist is, how can we respond to that? How can we build tools that allow us to relearn to engage with the other and thereby tackle injustice? So that, in a nutshell, is, I think, one of the ways in which anthropologists, even in the global north, can work towards constructing new building blocks to reinvigorate, to relearn what it means to communicate in an equitable way. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. There are some questions in the chat that I want to get to very soon, but I just wanted to say it's interesting. I hope all of the speakers have noticed that you all have some things in common, but I love debate and disagreement as well. And I also see and hear some of the issues concerning this. So one of them, let me turn to the chat. I don't know that that we can give people the word, so I'm going to Muggsy Spiegel in South Africa has a question. Is there a global South, global North tension here, or is there something else behind this dichotomy? Anybody? No? It's not provocative enough? Go ahead, Andrea. Oh, well, no. Who was that, Alex? I don't know. Let me try to have this be orderly. You're both smiling. Well, several of you are smiling. Andrea, go ahead. Is there a global?
There are a lot of questions here, but perhaps I can comment in one or two things. I don't understand this label of activism. Activism. What does it mean, activism? What I'm
wait. Can we stick to this question for a minute?
This question, yeah.
Global North tension?
Gordon, or yeah.
No. Muggsy Spiegel. It was early on. Is there a global South, global North tension here, or is there something else behind this dichotomy? I know Muggsy has been active. No, Andrea, I think you basically were suggesting that you and Nikiwe have a different
we have a different engagement, perhaps different engagement, because we produce anthropology from our experience, ethnographic experience in our society. I don't know the other. Maybe I can. I'm just guessing from our common perspective. But not only that we. Knowledge for me is situated, as I said, it's situated. There's no other way of producing knowledge. So you are standing, you have a standpoint, you have a position in society. So the idea that you can produce something rather neutral, rather above society is a little bit absurd for me. I mean, such a little bit 19th century discourse. Sorry about that, but I don't think that anybody suggested that. But I'm just bringing this to the the idea that you can speak from nowhere to nobody, it's not really real, not really real. And I don't think that to make it clear the position that one's stand is not only ethical, but it's methodological correct. Okay. So you can really have a debate about what's going on. So you have to make it clear what is your position within a certain milieu, huh? Within a certain context. And this is, I think,
Andrea, fine. I was going to actually ask Paul, but now he has raised his hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I might have been unclear when I said depoliticized, right? I'm not trying to make some claim that I'm somehow a cipher of objective knowledge, right? I mean, I don't think there are many anthropologists that don't claim anthropology, that ethnography is central, or that they don't have a position in the field. That wasn't my point. What I meant by depoliticized was your anthropology can't take one side. It can't be a one-sided anthropology. So even the whole idea that I'm at war with these people and the global South versus the global North, I mean, I understand that from your perspective, and that's fine. I mean, I started my paper, my talk by outlining I'm in a colonial space. I mean, that's where I am doing research, right? So I guess my question to you then, as a clearly an impassioned activist on the part of the people that you study, what's your end goal? Because if your end goal is to try and influence people, if your end goal is to try and as Alex was saying, conversation and sort of building blocks for conversation, I think by telling people that, there's this dichotomy between the global South, the global North, you can't understand us, we're at war, all of these sorts of ways of provoking. All I was saying is, when I write about, for example, industrial agriculture, or when I write about, for example, companion animal keeping, there are, of course, dark negative sides to these things, and they speak for themselves, right? So if you're writing something, for example, and you are against industrial agriculture, the best way to turn off people in government, to turn off people who are in those industries, to affect any kind of change other than your activist circle, right? The way to shut those people off is to engage in this sort of confrontational kind of discourse, right? The facts will speak for themselves.
Yeah,
that's the point. That's the point I was making, right? That's the point I'm making. I'm not trying to draw some, and I certainly wouldn't make any distinction that I know anything about Brazil or South Africa, but I do know a little bit about the history of Hokkaido, and I don't think that in any way I'm saying that I'm above my own positionality, or that anthropologists that anthropological work can't make a political statement, but making an overt political statement and talking about basically one side of a picture. So for me to do research, for example, on industrial agriculture, on industrial farmers, and never listen to the opinions or the ideas that industrial farmers have about their relationship with animals would be a pretty odd ethnography, right? So that was my point. I mean, I actually really appreciate your point of view. I'm just saying that's not the approach that I would take.
Can I ask a question?
Andrea, wait,
I mean, I guess I rambled. I mean, the main question is,
facts? What are facts?
Andrea, wait, I want to let other people in. I want to let other people in both.
I rambled. I should have just left it what it is, which is, what is your goal? If your goal is to convince other activist anthropologists that these are bad practices, then it's a great job. Good.
Can we let Nikiwa in here? She's been very active in the chat as well as speaking here.
Right. Yeah, that's a bit difficult to respond to, but speaking from somebody that has been part of the Roads Must Fall movement, a part of, Science Must Fall, all of these movements, student movements that are calling for decolonial approaches, we had to have a reckoning within the discipline of anthropology in our university about, the role of anthropology in the production of knowledge, and also in our positionality as subjects that are living in a space of massive injustices. South Africa is seen as one of the most unequal spaces in the world. Cape Town, where I live, is the most unequal city in the country. So how can I have this standpoint that sees be neutral when it comes to certain injustices that are happening on the ground? And people have been speaking. I think it was Alex who was talking about how do we listen? How do we learn to listen? People have been speaking for a very long time. They've been talking about these inequalities, these injustices. Yeah. It's now us. Are we actually ready to listen? Are we really ready to pay attention to the kinds of problems that people are experiencing on the ground? And how does my role as an anthropologist, a person of color, a woman in these spaces, I can't take this is my own personal experience, and like Andrea was talking about the positionality. My position as a Black woman in South Africa, there's no ways I can just go into the spaces that I do research and I see the kind of injustices to people that look like me, that are policies that are being developed, and the research that I'm doing is not going to speak to the kind of policies that are being developed that are going to affect the people on the ground. So again, it comes back to the situated knowledge. How are these, frameworks for policies that are being developed removed from the people on the ground? How does my role as an anthropologist that is working on the ground speak to the policies that are so removed, that are happening from the ground, the God's eye view of determining how people interact with their environments? On the ground, people are experiencing these issues on their bodies. So how does my work, I don't know if I can ever be neutral when it comes to that, because it actually affects people's bodies. And we're talking about violence as well. It's not just this instantaneous violence that we're looking at, but also slow violence, what Rob Nixon talks about. It's a generational thing. And the imperative is to respond in the moment that I have with the privilege I have. I have privilege with being an academic in this space. I have the privilege of having a degree, and there's an authority that comes with my knowledge, with my position as an academic, as a researcher. So how do I use that for the sake of the people I'm working with, rather than continuing these extractive relationships of, the anthropologists going out there into the field and working with communities and taking knowledge from these communities? How do I give back? What is my responsibility to the situations on the ground?
Thank you, Nikki. You're being very quiet. Can I ask you, do you have any thoughts about any of this?
Yes, I was wondering on the initial question from Maxi, if there is a tension between the global South and global North. I think yes, there is a tension, but not here particularly in our webinar, but a general tension politically, economically. This tension exists. We need to recognize it. The decolonial approach, it's a way we can deal with it, and I agree with it. All the time Andrea mentioned, and I think she's very right, it's what Boaventura de Sousa Santos says as epistemicide. So there is really epistemicide going on, because the global North doesn't recognize, for example, indigenous knowledge as knowledge. Yes. So yes, there is a tension, and we need to find ways to deal with this kind of tension. Alex proposed that we as anthropologists, we listen, although I understand as well the vision from Nikki when she says, but people are talking. Perhaps we didn't listen in the way we should. Yes, something we need to look to these different things. I agree from one side that perhaps we need to see better, listen carefully, and go back in history and try to see where people start talking about this type of violence, this type of invisibility, because this tension for me is quite visible and apparent.
Thank you, Rui. There are a number of questions about ethics and politics in the chat, but I want to take a little bit advantage of my role here as moderator to ask a question. Why are you guys still anthropologists? I mean, I don't know. You're not all centering things on humans. But you know, I think many anthropologists think that our anthropological duty is to study humans, to listen to humans. But you know, I'm sorry, I don't think rocks talk to us. I don't actually think many animals actually talk to us. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know that rivers talk to us. So, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, several of you said, you know, listening is an important thing, but are we listening to humans dealing with other kinds of beings in the environment? Am I just too provocative? Go ahead, Alex. You have to unmute though.
I know Nikwe also had her finger up.
Okay, sorry.
So
okay.
if you want to start, go ahead, Nikwe.
Thank you, Alex. Why are we anthropologists? I want to go back to what Rui is talking about indigenous thought and you know, certain knowledge isn't considered as knowledge. But within the South African context, there's this notion of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is you are a person through other people. You are a person through your relationships. And it's not restricted to the relationships between people, but it's also you are a person, you are able to become a society because of more than just human relations. It's about the relationships that you have with the environment as well. Human beings would not exist without the environment. Human beings would not exist without the bugs that, you know, are in your stomach that make you healthy, or without, you know, there's all sorts of relationships that are happening that make you human. And I think that's my position as in why I'm an anthropologist working with the environment, because I am who I am because of my relationships, because of the environment that makes me me.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, thank you very much, Nikki. You really nailed it. That's essentially what I want to say as well. Here in Canada, we usually refer to it through the First Nations phrase, all our relations. And the idea is that none of us could exist in the way that we do without each other. And when we say none, we refer not to the humans only. So this whole idea of anthropology, studying anthropos, I think is a 20th century or maybe even 19th century idea. And it is completely and utterly outdated. I don't think this is where we're going with anthropology in the future. Certainly not in Canada is my hope. I think many younger anthropologists would agree with this. And I'm not saying you have to become a post-humanist necessarily, but the realization that our future cannot continue to silence other than human beings. And this takes me back to what is a building block? What does it mean to reconcile communication across the species boundaries? First of all, I think the species boundaries has never been very rigid. Like Nikiwe pointed out, genetically, the genetic matter in my organism that can be traced to just myself, perhaps, amounts to, you know, debatably maybe 10%, and the remaining 90% are all kinds of organisms that co-populate me. So I can't ask who am I should ask who are we, and so in this kind of narrative of who are we, am I actually listening to us, right? And then, you know, listening is one thing. I think anthropologists have listened for a long time. And I think we've listened in quite good ways. Even in the 20th century, we have amazing ethnographies. But what does it mean to listen? Shouldn't it be followed up with a response? And I'm addressing not only anthropologists here, but all disciplines. And I speak specifically into industry. And this takes me to Paul's actually work, and where I think it can have immense effects on the future of our planet, is how do we work across disciplines, say with engineers, for instance, bioengineers. How can we infuse the kind of knowledge, the qualitative knowledge that ethnography can gain in the field between species into the plans, developments of engineering and of these kinds of industries? Talk about milking apparatuses, for instance. How would the industrial design change if it actually took seriously the desires, the needs, the preferences, and the life quality from the perspective, as much as we can ascertain that, of dairy cows? You know, what is their relationship with grass? What is their rhythm of movement? What actually tastes good? What is desirable? And to what extent can humans even assess that? I think that's very much part of anthropology and very much part of the future of our own species on this planet.
Okay, it's now 10:30 here. It's half an hour. Okay, we're all over the planet. But I want to have, I don't know, I want to ask one or two more questions in the chat. We can go over a little bit. Gordon Matthews in Hong Kong. I don't know if he's still in Hong Kong, but he's normally in Hong Kong. He asks, does activism entail a single view of the world? This is officially, I know, addressing Andrea, but I would like to open this. Rui, I saw you smiling, right? You want to say something?
Well, because I was smiling because I cannot see anthropology without being engaged. So, of course, there is an engagement with the community I work, with the people I work. There is this engagement. I cannot make a separation between what usually is labeled as activism and science. No, I produce knowledge from what Andre says as my point, my standing point there. And of course, I engage with my community. So for me, I don't see this as a clear separation, and I have doubts on that, I need to say. And of course, I don't adopt a positivist vision, anthropological vision of seeing the other in that way. So I, of course, engage with the other.
Yeah.
Okay, Andrea, this was officially addressed to you, as you probably saw. Can you be brief? As it's now already past.
I totally agree with Rui. Thank you, Rui. It's engagement and it's also responsibility. We have responsibility for what we say, what we write. We write testimonies. And what we write makes effects on power relations. At least here in Brazil, it makes a lot of effects for any kind of effects. So we must be responsible and responsive towards the knowledge we produce in this context. And second, we are demanded by the people we engage with, you know? First time I went to the Jequitinhonha Valley. Jequitinhonha Valley is one of the poorest areas of the world in the northeast of Minas Gerais. When I first went there with my students, they were threatened by a hydroelectric dam. And the people took me to this house of this old man. And he asked me, he begged me. This was a very senior person, what is kind of a chief of this locality. And he begged me to help him to stop the dam. And then I told him, I was astonished. I was very young at the time. And I looked, my students were even younger. So we were in panic and I looked at him and I said, Seu Prudêncio, his name, Seu Prudêncio, do you understand? I am only a teacher. And these are my students. I have no power. I cannot stop the dam. But then he looked at me and he said, but you have a knowledge which I don't have. So you have more knowledge than I do, and you have access. So you can really do something. You can really help us. And then I looked at him and said, well, so then we have to do it together because you have the knowledge I don't have about your place, about your locality. So this is a kind of a pact that anthropologists must do and face while doing field work, really field work. We are engaged in field work. So people ask us to do things and to ask us to, to send the message through the authorities and other people in power, in charge. So this is what I believe is engagement, and to be responsible with care about the scientific, all the procedures, anthropological procedures that we must be. No, we are not only reproducing what people say, we're not only, we are producing something different from what they are saying, but somehow we are reverberating, echoing a situation of violence and of the powerless of these contexts. And really facing large entrepreneurs, large groups, companies, mining companies, they can hire any anthropologist in the world. They can hire and they pay well. They pay really well to all sorts of engineers, biologists, etc. Local people can pay nothing. They pay nothing. So this is an uneven situation here, an inequality of access to knowledge, to justice, to government, to everything. So they know that, and local people know that. I work with the people that suffer from the mining disaster here from Vale, one of the largest mining companies in the world. There were a lot of disasters where I live, at least two largest ones, one in 2015 and another one in 2019. 300 people died immediately. They were buried by a collapse of the tailing dams. And nobody was responsible for this till today. 7 years from the Mariana disaster, 4 years from this Brumadinho disaster, and nobody was charged. So we are relating here with a huge, sorry, this time pressure is a little bit too much for me, Virginia. I cannot formulate anything in English with this pressure. But anyway, I just want to bring power into the question here. Structures of power, very well established historically, patterns of power, and with Bolsonaro, absolute lack of democracy in Brazil, absolute lack of democracy, and also racism. One last thing, please. There are 2 people missing in the Amazon since Sunday, one British and another anthropologist, both white people. Immediately, the federal police was made available to look for these people, to search these people, and that's what they have to do. But the Yanomami people have been dying, being raped, being sacrificed in the same Amazon, and no federal police, nothing, no federal forces were moved to save these people. This is racism. This is absolutely racism. Some people are sacrificed. Their bodies are given to sacrifice in the name of development for the reach of a few. Sorry.
You have definitely gotten your point across. Don't worry. But I want to end with, questions, comments from 2 people in the chat. One is, just in the last minute or so, from Muggsy in Cape Town and from Gordon in Hong Kong. So I'm just going to read these. I mean, you can read them. Muggsy writes, I'm sensing another tension here. Why is it our responsibility, as Andrea and Rui say, to the, quote, communities with whom we work, unquote, rather than to our whole social context, which includes our embeddedness in academic institutions that play ball with capitalist modernity. And Gordon, I don't know if he replied to this or to something else. Gordon wrote, almost all engaged anthropology is coming from a common political perspective, it seems. Is that perspective necessarily correct? Maybe, but I worry that I can exactly predict what anthropologists will say in advance. Anybody want to say anything about that? No. Are we just repeating ourselves? Alex, you look like you're thinking.
Well, no, I read that, and this one-sidedness of anthropology, it takes us back to an old dichotomy, which I think is a simplification of the situation. It's never been that simple. It's very gray. The communities we work with, certainly in the global north, I can't speak for South America because I'm not well versed in that region. But here in Indigenous Canada, I shall say, we have a lot of resource extraction that is highly contested, and it's contested by First Nations. But to say all First Nations in all areas under all conditions are always opposed to it would be a gross simplification. It's very complicated. There are lots of payrolls that people need to receive to feed their children. So, talking about a mine, about oil extraction or gas or pipelines or things like that. I lived in the Western Canadian Arctic for a number of years, and one of the Indigenous businesses there is a transportation company, and another one a construction company. These are Inuit-owned companies. They're amazing companies. They have great vision, and they sustain their society, their community. They often do depend on quote unquote development projects, right? At the same time, they're hugely concerned about how many of these very same development projects are going to affect the natural world, polar bear life cycles and things like that, on which the community also depends. So taking sides, I think, is a gross simplification here. And as anthropologists, we've always prided ourselves and challenged ourselves to look at nuance, to look at all sides and to listen to all beings and all peoples that have a stake in these problems. So yes and no, but I think it's not a matter so much of taking sides. We are still in the business of translation, I think, of interpretation, of trying to enter the shoes of other people to see what are actual needs and what are the voices. Can they be brought into a productive dialogue? And I am hopeful for the future. And I think as anthropologists, we have a unique position to work towards this kind of dialogue. That doesn't mean that things don't have to change.
Are you there? I'm sorry, my internet is a little unstable.
Virginia gone away.
No, I'm back. Can you not hear me?
We can hear you now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my internet is a little unstable. So it is now, as I said, we usually go long, and that's good. It has to do with engagement and so forth. But I mean, just, we need to call this quits. We can obviously go on for a long time, but I want to give the speakers, I don't know, one last chance. So let's start again the same order we used before. Paul, you want to say anything that you didn't say?
No, just that I agree with Gordon in the comments. It's predictable. I've had this conversation a dozen times, so. It was interesting enough to have it again this time, though, so fair enough.
What is it you agree with, Gordon?
There's basically one perspective that keeps emerging in anthropology for the last 5 years.
And you agree that is not true?
I think it is true, and I think that I also agree, or at least I think I agree with what Alex was just saying, that the strength of anthropology is a diversity of voices, and having those voices come into a kind of discussion. So you don't have to agree with those voices. But anyway, that's my perspective.
Nikki, what? Did you want to say anything you hadn't said before, or?
No, just to thank you for the fascinating conversations and engagement, and really thought-provoking questions and responses. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
Okay, Rui?
Well, thank you to all. It was very, very interesting. I don't have a clear opinion on that as well. I agree with Alex, with Andrea, on that position of the anthropologists. It was very, very interesting, your points of view, and perhaps we need to do other webinars just to expand our thoughts that emerge here, because there are lots of seeds here that I think they need to mature and grow, and let's debate again on some of the issues. So thank you for this. It was an incredible moment.
I'll pass this on to Clara, who organizes, normally, as you know, organizes these webinars. It's fine. Andrea?
Yes, I also would like to thank you and everybody for this very rich debate, very warm and hot debate on this topic. And I hope that we can really develop our ideas a little bit further in another opportunity, because I really think that ethnographic data is really important. To speak in general like that, ideas at random, it's a bit difficult, at least for me. So I feel more comfortable when I am really based on my fieldwork data, the situations, because then we can explore the context, the historical context and the immediate context of each situation, ethnographic situation. But anyway, I think this was very provocative, and I really bring a lot of questions to my reflections here about the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alex? Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be part of this wonderful group. Lots of good ideas. I think I want to close, or my closing note would be, we have a great thing going here for anthropology and within anthropology. But our discipline is also on a daily basis being by available funding, by industry. And I think we will have to fight for our position in the world as anthropologists. And I think one of the best ways to do that is by supporting one another. I'm all for debate, for hot, sharp, and warm debate, as Andrea says. That's wonderful. But ultimately, I think we need to hold each other up through this and in this debate. And I think we see eye to eye on that, Andrea. So we all come from different positions, different positionality, like we said, and we all have strengths. And I love this forum because it is an example of how we can contribute these strengths, these unique viewpoints, to make our discipline more heard and more relevant and more applicable in the future. And so I think we need to reach out and seek further dialogue with industry and across disciplines. And I agree also with Andrea that what we have uniquely is ethnographic insight, this very nuanced, detailed, careful way of listening. And so, yes, we have a responsibility, but we also have a responsibility to contribute and make accessible to other disciplines, other industry. And so that's, for me, the closing note. I hope that we're moving in that direction. And I am hopeful. This discussion, again, has made me more hopeful that we can find a way together forward. And together means not just within anthropology. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Alex. Gordon, I know I hadn't asked you, but he is actually deputy chair of the WCAA. And I wonder if you wanted to say anything at the end?
Just 2 words. Thank you to everybody. It was a really interesting debate, and we disagree, but that's what anthropology is all about. And I agree with Alex. Above all, we have to support each other despite our disagreements, and I think we can.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Clara would be proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, everyone.
We should do this again, right?
Yes, let's do this again.
This again.